Michael Lawson, billionaire and CEO of Lawson Enterprises, stood still in the grand hallway of his mansion, a glass of scotch in his hand. The soft hum of silence filled the air, broken only by the occasional creak of wood underfoot as the evening settled in. He had everything one could want: wealth, power, luxury, but the same old emptiness echoed through the vast halls, no different than the day before. He thought of the people in his life, most of them there for the paycheck, not the man. His ex-wife had left years ago, and his adult son, Robert, barely spoke to him anymore. He'd thought once, years ago, that having it all would fill the void. But now, in the quiet of the evening, he realized that nothing could fill the hollow space inside him. Tonight was like any other. A long day of business deals, numbers, and meetings. He dismissed the staff early, preferring solitude after the barrage of business calls. His mind wandered, the weight of his own thoughts pressing him deeper into the shadows of his own mansion. But then, a soft noise broke through the stillness. It was a faint sound, barely perceptible. At first, he thought it was the wind against the windows, the house settling for the night. But the sound persisted faint and quiet, almost like a rustle of fabric. Michael hesitated. He was no stranger to strange noises. This was an old house, but something about the sound felt off. He set the glass down, the cold liquid sloshing against the rim as he walked toward the guest wing. The soft rustling grew louder, followed by the faintest sound of a sniffle. His heart quickened, a strange flutter in his chest that he couldn't place. His feet moved on their own, instinct pushing him forward. His mind raced with possibilities. Was someone breaking in? His thoughts ran cold with security alarms and hidden cameras. He hadn't allowed strangers in his house for years, not after things had fallen apart. He rounded the corner of the hall and came to a sudden stop. There, sitting in the shadows near the staircase, was a young girl no older than 10. Her ragged clothes hung loosely on her frail frame. She looked up at him with wide, terrified eyes, clutching a small, tattered backpack to her chest. Michael stood frozen, a million questions flashing through his mind, none of them making sense. He had known this mansion intimately for years, yet he had never seen this child before. He blinked, wondering if his eyes were deceiving him. The room was dim, but her pale face was unmistakable. Her presence sudden and jarring. The girl didn't move, didn't speak. She just stared at him with an air of quiet fear, as though she wasn't sure whether to run or stay. "Who are you?" Michael's voice was steady, but a strange tension had settled in his chest. The girl flinched slightly, but there was no answer. She didn't even attempt to stand. Michael took a step forward, cautiously. "Are you lost?" She didn't answer. Instead, she wiped her eyes, sniffled again, and looked at him with the kind of expression that struck him deeply. It wasn't just fear, there was something else, something he couldn't place. Michael felt his breath catch in his throat. What was she doing here? How did she get into his house without anyone noticing? He took another step closer. "I won't hurt you," he said, more out of instinct than anything. He wasn't used to speaking so softly, but something about her made him feel like she needed to hear it. Still, she didn't move. Her eyes never left his, and for the first time in years, Michael felt his carefully constructed walls begin to crack. The silence between them stretched longer than either of them probably cared for. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the girl spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I just need to stay." Her words hung in the air, and Michael felt the weight of them settle around him. She wasn't asking for food or shelter. She wasn't demanding anything at all. She simply wanted to stay. But why? Why here? Why now? Stay? Michael repeated, his voice betraying the confusion he was trying to hide. He didn't know what to say. He didn't know who she was, why she was here, or how to handle the situation. He had no answers. He was used to being in control, but this was entirely different. "I don't want to go back," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Her eyes dropped to the floor, and a sob threatened to escape. Something stirred inside him, an emotion he couldn't immediately place. It wasn't pity. It wasn't even sympathy. It was something deeper, something unspoken, but it gnawed at him nonetheless. The vulnerability in her voice, the fragility of her presence cut through him in a way he hadn't expected. Before he could ask another question, a soft voice interrupted them. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to intrude." Michael spun around, startled, only to see his housekeeper, Linda, standing at the doorway, looking at the girl with a soft expression. "I found her in the garden earlier. I didn't know she was here." The sudden intrusion broke the tension. Linda's voice was calm, and she looked concerned but not alarmed. She said she was hungry, and when I tried to ask her questions, she got scared. I thought I'd better leave it for you. Michael turned back to the girl, still sitting on the floor. He felt his stomach tighten, his emotions surging. What was going on? Why had this girl shown up here, and what kind of situation had she come from? I didn't want to be a bother, the girl whispered, her head hanging low. No, Michael said, his voice softer now. You're not a bother. He paused, 1,000 thoughts rushing through him. The girl was alone, she was in need. And somehow, in the midst of his perfect, polished world, this stranger, this child had found her way into his life. But something in his gut told him that this wasn't just a chance encounter. This was the start of something much bigger. Something that would change everything he thought he knew about life and what it meant to care for someone. Michael didn't know where to go from here, but he knew he couldn't walk away. Not now. For the first time in years, he felt an unfamiliar pull in his chest, a feeling of responsibility, but he didn't know yet what that responsibility meant. If you've been moved by Michael's unexpected encounter with the young girl, don't forget to subscribe, like, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter. Comment below and let us know where you're watching from and what you think about this mysterious start. Your support helps grow this community and keep the journey going. Michael stood motionless for a moment, the weight of the girl's presence still lingering in the air. He had been used to control, to order, to make decisions quickly and with certainty, but here, with this fragile girl sitting on the floor of his mansion, everything felt uncertain. Her quiet vulnerability tugged at him in a way he couldn't ignore. Linda, his housekeeper, remained standing at the door, watching with an almost maternal gaze. She had been with him for years, ever since his first marriage had ended. She knew him well enough to see when something had shaken him, and it was clear this moment had. I'll leave you to it, Mr. Lawson, she said gently, her voice soft with understanding. She's had a rough time, but I'm sure you'll know what to do. Michael nodded absent-mindedly, not sure if he even knew what to do himself. The weight of his thoughts pressed down on him as Linda left the room, closing the door softly behind her. The silence that followed was deafening. The girl hadn't moved since her last words. She sat on the floor, still clutching the small backpack to her chest. Her eyes flickered up to meet his, then quickly dropped again, as though she wasn't sure whether she should make eye contact or retreat even further into herself. Michael exhaled slowly and crouched down to her level, trying to make himself less intimidating. She didn't flinch this time, but he could see the fear lingering just beneath the surface of her eyes. What's your name? He asked softly, keeping his voice low, careful not to scare her away. She hesitated, her fingers curling tighter around the strap of her backpack. For a moment, Michael wasn't sure if she'd answer at all. But then, quietly, she spoke. Sophia, she whispered, her voice trembling as though it took every ounce of courage to say it. Sophia, Michael repeated, feeling the name settle in the air between them. It felt like the first step in something much larger, something he wasn't prepared for but couldn't turn away from. You're safe here, you know? Sophia looked up at him, her eyes filled with a kind of quiet desperation. She didn't speak, but the question was there, clear as day. Why? Why was she here? Why was she safe with him? Michael felt the shift in the air, the weight of her gaze pulling at his chest. He had made a decision, hadn't he? To let her stay. But as her silent plea hung between them, he wondered just how long he could keep that promise. His life had been built on control, on the belief that everything had its place, and nothing ever went off course. But here in this moment it all felt out of his hands. I don't know why you're here, Sophia, Michael said, his voice quiet and honest. But I do know that you're not going anywhere. Sophia didn't respond immediately. Instead, she lowered her head again, pressing the back of her hand to her face. Michael wasn't sure if she was trying to hide tears or if she was simply unsure of what to say. The silence stretched between them again, but this time it didn't feel as heavy. There was a subtle sense of understanding beginning to form in the air, like two people standing on the edge of something, unsure of whether to jump but knowing they had no choice but to move forward. Michael stood up and motioned to the couch across from her. Come on, let's get you something to eat. You must be hungry. Sophia hesitated, her eyes darting around the room as if she weren't sure where she fit in this place. But then, as if an invisible thread pulled her forward, she slowly stood up, her legs shaky from whatever she had endured in the past. Michael led her to the kitchen, moving more out of instinct than anything else. The mansion felt even more empty now, as if the vast spaces between them and the walls had grown wider. The warmth of the kitchen seemed to contrast sharply with the cold silence of the rest of the house. It was strange, how it felt like it had always been just him in this house until now. He opened the refrigerator, offering her a variety of leftovers. "What do you like to eat, Sophia?" he asked, trying his best to sound casual, though he knew that casual was the furthest thing from his mind right now. She glanced at the options but remained quiet. Michael couldn't help but notice how thin she looked, how frail. His heart tightened at the thought of her wandering around the mansion in search of something, or someone that could offer her comfort. "Do you like soup?" he asked, moving to prepare something warm. Sophia nodded, though still silently. The simple act of her agreeing felt like a quiet invitation, like she was beginning to trust him, just a little. Michael prepared the soup, his hands moving mechanically, his mind racing with questions he didn't have answers for. As he served the soup, he watched Sophia carefully. Her gaze was fixed on the bowl in front of her, but she didn't touch it right away. Instead, she sat there, her body stiff, unsure of how to proceed. Michael paused, and for the first time in years, he felt the weight of uncertainty. How did one take care of a child in need? How did he, someone who had built a life around business deals and numbers, step into the role of protector? "You're safe here, Sophia," Michael said again, this time more to himself than to her. "No one's going to hurt you." Sophia finally looked up at him, her eyes still haunted but softer than before. She didn't smile, but she didn't look away either. For a moment, the two of them just sat there, sharing a silent understanding. Michael's chest tightened. He couldn't explain it, but something in him had already shifted. Maybe it was her presence, or maybe it was the quiet vulnerability she carried with her. But he knew, in that moment, that his life would never be the same. Sophia finally took a spoonful of the soup, her hands trembling slightly. She didn't speak, but the act of eating, however small, felt like progress. A tiny step toward trust, and for the first time Michael felt like he wasn't just passing through life, but actually living it. Before we continue, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell to support our channel growth. Comment below to tell us where you're watching from and what you think of this story. Your support helps us continue to grow this community. The next few days passed in a quiet haze, the mansion feeling unusually full for a place that had always been so empty. Michael had settled into a routine, making sure Sophia had food and a safe place to sleep. He hadn't expected how much the presence of this small girl would alter the atmosphere of the house. But every room now seemed filled with the soft echoes of her movements, her small footsteps, her quiet hums, the occasional sound of her stuffed rabbit dragging along the floor. Yet, despite the small comforts he tried to offer, Michael could sense the tension building in the air. Sophia remained withdrawn, as though carrying the weight of a past too heavy to share. She spoke little, preferring to sit quietly in the corners of the room, her eyes distant. When she did speak, it was often just a few words, as if she were unsure of how much to reveal, or simply afraid to speak at all. The mansion, with all its grandeur, suddenly felt suffocating. Michael wasn't used to this kind of silence, and yet he found himself tiptoeing around it, unsure of what to say or do. He couldn't help but feel a growing unease. Was he truly helping her? Or was he just giving her a place to hide, a temporary escape from a world that had hurt her? It was one evening, after dinner, when Michael's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of Sophia's voice. She had come into the living room, her small figure standing in the doorway, her hands clasped in front of her. Michael had been reading the latest report from the company, but his eyes instinctively lifted to meet hers. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael set the paper down, his heart thudding in his chest. "Sorry? For what?" Sophia took a slow, careful step forward. She looked down at the floor, her voice trembling slightly. "For being here. For taking up your space." Michael felt a sharp pang of sorrow at her words. She was still in the habit of apologizing for existing, for needing help, as though her very presence was an inconvenience. His chest tightened as he stood up and walked toward her, crouching down so they were eye level. "No, Sophia," he said, his voice soft but firm. "You're not a burden, you're not taking up my space. You're safe here, and that's what matters." She hesitated for a moment, her hands still clutching the edges of her worn hoodie. "But I didn't mean to be here. I didn't mean to come to your house. I didn't know where else to go." Michael's heart broke at the rawness in her voice. He saw the pain in her eyes, the fear that she wasn't worthy of the safety he was offering. He couldn't help but wonder what had brought her to this point. What had happened in her life that made her feel like she wasn't deserving of basic care or kindness? "I know, Sophia," he said softly, lifting a hand to gently touch her shoulder. "But you don't have to be sorry for needing help. Everyone needs help sometimes. It's not a weakness, it's part of being human. Sophia nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She seemed to want to say more, but the words were stuck. She swallowed hard, as if forcing herself to hold back whatever emotion was threatening to rise to the surface. Michael knew there was more to her silence than simple shyness. It was as if there were a deep well of unspoken trauma that she was desperately trying to keep locked away. "Do you want to talk about it?" Michael asked gently, his voice sincere. "About what happened?" Sophia stiffened slightly at the question, her gaze falling to the floor. For a long moment she didn't answer. Michael waited, allowing the silence to linger, not wanting to rush her. Finally she spoke, her voice barely audible, barely a whisper. "I don't remember much, just flashes of things. The people who hurt me, I remember them best when I'm scared. I remember what it felt like when they left me." The words struck Michael like a blow. His heart dropped at the thought of her being abandoned, of someone so young having to carry such a heavy burden alone. "You were abandoned?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. Sophia nodded, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. "I was in foster homes before. But they didn't want me, they just passed me on until the last place I thought maybe this time would be different. But they just wanted to forget about me. I wasn't wanted. I'm never wanted. I have never known love." Tears welling down her face. Michael stood up, unable to sit with the pain of her words any longer. He paced slowly across the room, his thoughts a whirlwind. He couldn't believe anyone would treat a child like that. His own life had been filled with wealth and comfort, but he could barely comprehend what it would be like to feel like an outcast in the world. He stopped in his tracks, turning to look at her. "You're wanted here. I want you here, Sophia." Sophia's head jerked up, her eyes wide with disbelief. She searched his face as though trying to find the catch in his words, trying to see if he was lying. When she found no deceit, she just nodded, her lip trembling. "I don't know what to do," she whispered. "I don't know how to be happy." Michael's chest tightened again, the weight of her confession settling heavily on him. He couldn't solve all of her pain, but he could offer her one thing: stability, kindness, a promise that, at least for now, she was safe. "You don't have to figure it all out today," he said, walking back toward her. "We'll take it one step at a time. No pressure. But I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." Sophia looked up at him with something resembling hope in her eyes. For the first time since she'd entered his life, Michael saw a flicker of something beyond the walls she had built around herself. But just as quickly as it appeared, the look faded, replaced by a quiet sadness. She didn't believe she deserved this kindness. Not yet, and Michael knew it would take time for her to truly accept it. The days had started to blur into one another. Michael had settled into a routine of offering Sophia the safety of his mansion, of providing her food and warmth. Yet, the weight of the secret she carried hung heavily in the air. Every time Michael looked at her, he saw a child who had been through something far worse than he could imagine. He could see it in her eyes, the way she flinched whenever a car drove past the mansion, the way she recoiled when someone raised their voice in the house, even if it was just to ask if she was comfortable. She was afraid of things, of people, of situations, and Michael couldn't help but feel a surge of helplessness every time she looked away from him, every time she withdrew into herself. There was still so much she hadn't said. He knew she wasn't ready, but the longer she stayed silent, the more Michael felt like a stranger in his own home. It wasn't just the secrets about her past. It was the uncertainty of what to do with this responsibility that had been thrust upon him. One evening, after a quiet dinner, as the night grew still, Michael sat alone in the living room, sipping on a drink. His thoughts were interrupted when the soft sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. He looked up to see Sophia standing in the doorway, her figure silhouetted by the dim light. "Are you okay?" he asked, setting his drink down and standing up, suddenly alert. Sophia hesitated before nodding, but Michael could see the tension in her posture. Her hands were trembling slightly, and her eyes darted around the room as though she was looking for an escape. "I'm fine," she said softly, but there was an edge of desperation in her voice. Michael studied her, wondering why she felt the need to keep the walls up. Why didn't she trust him? Why couldn't she open up? "Come here," he said gently, his voice quieter. "You don't have to pretend. I know something's bothering you." Sophia flinched, but she didn't retreat. She stepped into the room, keeping a safe distance from him. Michael could feel her discomfort, but he didn't want to push her. He knew she'd opened up to him before, but this, whatever it was, felt like a deep hidden wound. I can't stay here," Sophia finally whispered, looking down at the floor. I don't belong here. I shouldn't be here. The words hit Michael like a blow. He was caught off guard, not expecting this admission. He had been so focused on giving her the safety she'd never had, that he hadn't realized just how deeply she believed she didn't deserve it. His chest tightened, but he fought to keep his voice steady. You belong here, Sophia. You don't have to hide from me. You don't have to keep running. She shook her head, and he could see the tears welling up in her eyes. The vulnerability in her face was painful to witness. I don't know how to stay. I've been moved from place to place, from home to home. They said I wasn't enough. They said I was too broken to fix. They didn't want me. Michael stepped closer, his voice soft but firm. I'm not them. I'm not going to turn you away. You are not broken. Sophia met his gaze, her eyes filled with confusion and doubt. She was so used to hearing the words unwanted and unworthy that they had become a part of her identity. Michael could see that now, and it was as if every wall she had built in the years before had been made from that single, devastating belief. I'm not going to give up on you, Michael said, his voice carrying an authority that surprised even him. You're here now, and you have a place in this house in my life. And I'm going to make sure you have a chance to heal. No more running. The room grew still, and for a moment it felt like everything had paused. Sophia stood there unmoving, and Michael wondered if his words had even reached her. But then slowly she let out a breath, her shoulders sagging with a mix of relief and exhaustion. She nodded, just slightly, before whispering, Okay. The word was small, fragile, but it was the first sign of progress. Michael felt something shift in the air. It wasn't a huge victory, but it was a start. And in that moment, that was enough. Later that evening, as Michael was walking through the hallway to his study, he passed by the guest wing. The door to Sophia's room was slightly ajar, and he heard soft sobs coming from inside. His heart twisted at the sound, but he didn't approach. He knew better than to intrude when the pain was too raw, too fresh. But as he turned to walk away, he made a silent promise to himself. He would be there for her. He would be the anchor she needed, the stability she had never known. If you're feeling moved by Michael and Sophia's journey, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell to this channel. Comment below and tell us where you're watching from and what you think about their growing bond. Your support helps us continue to grow this community and share more heartfelt stories. The mansion felt different now. The echo of footsteps in the halls wasn't just the noise of an empty house anymore, it was the sound of life. Laughter echoed where silence had once reigned, and there were moments of stillness that held more meaning than anything Michael had experienced in years. Sophia had come a long way since that first night. The child who had barely spoken, whose eyes were clouded with fear and uncertainty, was beginning to show signs of trust, small glimpses of the girl she could be. But despite the progress, Michael could sense that there was something still holding her back. The walls she'd built were thick, and they wouldn't come down without a fight. Michael could feel it. The emotional weight was rising. He knew it was time to confront the deeper layers of the pain that still lingered in her eyes. Time to get to the core of what made her pull away from him, despite everything he'd tried to do. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew that, for this to work, he had to push past her walls, gently, carefully, but firmly. It was one of those rare, quiet evenings when the world outside was still, the sky painted with the soft colors of dusk. Michael had been going over some business reports in his study, trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy, when the familiar sound of Sophia's footsteps came down the hall. She stopped at the door, hesitating just outside, as if she weren't sure whether to enter. Michael looked up from the papers, his heart tightening at the sight of her. Come in, Sophia, he called softly. His voice welcoming. She hesitated a moment longer before stepping inside, her small form almost swallowed by the vastness of the study. Her eyes darted around the room, but she didn't meet his gaze. Instead, she stood awkwardly by the door, clutching her backpack like it was a shield. What's on your mind? Michael asked gently, setting the papers down and leaning back in his chair. For a long time, Sophia didn't speak. She just stood there, her face unreadable. Michael felt the familiar knot of frustration twist in his chest. What was she holding back? Finally, she spoke, her voice quiet but carrying a weight that settled in the air between them. I don't know how to stay here. I don't know how to feel like I belong here. Michael's heart twisted. He had suspected it, but hearing it out loud hurt more than he expected. For a brief moment, he didn't know how to respond. What could he say to a child who had been abandoned, mistreated, and taught that she didn't belong anywhere? Sophia, he began, his voice steady but soft. I understand why you feel that way, but you do belong here. You don't have to earn my love. You don't have to prove yourself to me. I see you. You are worth everything. She shook her head slowly, as if the words didn't quite reach her. I've been moved around so many times. People just take me in because they have to. They don't want me. They never really wanted me. Michael stood up then, crossing the room to where she stood. There was a resolve in his chest now, something that had taken root ever since he had first seen her sitting alone in the hallway of the mansion. This wasn't just about taking care of her. It was about being a father to her, showing her that no matter what had happened before, she was important. She mattered. He gently placed his hand on her shoulder, a simple gesture, but one that felt like an anchor. I didn't take you in because I had to, Sophia. I did it because you matter, and you belong here. You're my family now. Sophia's eyes flickered up to his, uncertainty still clouding her face. You mean that? Michael nodded, his voice soft but firm. I do. You're not just someone I'm looking after. You're my daughter now, whether you believe it or not. And I'm not going anywhere. The room fell into a heavy silence. Sophia's breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, Michael wondered if she could even understand what he was offering. He didn't expect her to fully trust him yet, but he needed her to know that he was committed. He was staying for her, for them. And just like that, the silence began to soften. She finally looked up at him, and for the first time in a long time, Michael saw something new in her eyes, a flicker of hope. She didn't say anything at first, but the small nod she gave was all the answer he needed. Michael smiled gently, pulling her into a hug, holding her tightly as if to seal that promise in place. He didn't know what the future would bring, but he knew that with this moment, something had shifted. He could feel it, a change that would stay with them both. Later that night, Michael stood at the window, looking out at the sprawling grounds of the mansion. The stars twinkled brightly in the sky, a reminder of how small the world really was. But within this space, this house, he felt something grow inside him, something that had been missing for so long. He wasn't alone anymore. He had a family now. He didn't know what the future held, or how long this new chapter would last, but he knew one thing. He would fight for it. He would fight for Sophia. For them, and that fight had only just begun. If Michael and Sophia's journey is inspiring you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you can stay updated on their emotional journey. Comment below and tell us where you're watching from and what you think of their growing bond. Your support helps us continue to grow this beautiful community. The sun had barely begun to rise over the mansion, casting a soft golden light across the expansive grounds. Michael sat at the window of his study, his hands folded in front of him as he gazed out at the beauty of the morning. He had always been a man who valued control, who made decisions based on logic and reason. But in the weeks since Sophia had entered his life, everything had changed. It wasn't just about offering her a safe place. It was about learning to care, learning to love in ways he never had before. The emotional walls he had built over the years, the walls he thought were necessary to protect himself from the world, had slowly come down. In their place, he had built something more real, a connection, a bond, a family. And now, as he looked out over the landscape, he realized how much he had grown in the process. How much Sophia had grown. She had been so afraid to trust him, to believe that she was worthy of love. But now, as the days passed, her smile had become a little brighter, her steps a little more confident. She was no longer the quiet, fearful child who had hidden in the shadows of his mansion. She was becoming the person she had always deserved to be, someone who was seen, heard, and loved. But there was still one final obstacle to face. The call had come yesterday from Sophia's caseworker. The adoption process had been slow, tangled in legal red tape, but now, after weeks of back and forth, the final approval was in. Sophia was legally his daughter. The paperwork had been signed, the forms completed. But there was something more important that Michael had yet to give her, the promise of a family. One that wasn't just about legal papers or signatures. It was about making sure she truly felt like she belonged, that she would never be abandoned again. Michael heard the soft sound of footsteps behind him, and turned to find Sophia standing in the doorway of his study. Her eyes still sleepy, but filled with the same quiet strength she had been showing lately. She had come a long way in a short time, and as much as he had helped her heal, she had helped him heal as well. "Good morning," she said softly, her voice still a bit hushed, but warmer than it had been. "Good morning," Michael replied with a gentle smile. "How did you sleep?" "Better," she said, her lips curling into a small but genuine smile. "I'm starting to get used to being here. With you." Michael stood up and crossed the room to where she stood. He wasn't sure why he felt such a sense of peace, but the words that came out of his mouth felt like the truth. You don't have to get used to it, Sophia. You're already here. This is your home now. Sophia's eyes widened, and she looked up at him as if trying to process the weight of his words. For the first time since she had come into his life, Michael saw her vulnerability replaced with something else, a glimmer of hope, a belief that maybe, just maybe, she had finally found the place where she belonged. I'm not going anywhere, Michael continued, his voice soft but firm. You're not going anywhere. This is your family now. And I'm here, always. Sophia stood still for a moment, her eyes brimming with emotion as she stared at him. Then, without warning, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. Her hug was tentative at first, as though she were unsure of how to accept the love he was offering. But Michael held her gently, his arms steady and sure around her small frame. For a moment, the world outside seemed to fall away. There was no more fear, no more uncertainty, just the warm, solid feeling of family. And in that moment, Michael understood what it meant to truly be a father, not just to provide for someone, but to be there for them, through every tear, every smile, every triumph, and every setback. Sophia pulled back slightly, her eyes bright but her voice shaky. You really mean it? I'm really yours now? Michael smiled, his heart full. You are. You always have been. Just then, a knock on the door interrupted their moment. Michael opened it to find Linda standing in the doorway, a warm smile on her face. The adoption papers came through this morning, she said gently. It's official. Sophia's officially yours. Sophia's eyes lit up at the news, her face breaking into a hesitant but radiant smile. The weight that had been hanging over her seemed to lift, and for the first time she truly looked like a child who was ready to belong. Michael placed a hand on her shoulder. Now we can start the next chapter together. Later that day, Michael and Sophia stood together outside the mansion, watching as the sun dipped below the horizon. It was a symbol of the new beginning. They were embarking on a future full of hope, healing, and family. I'm proud of you, Sophia, Michael said quietly. You've come so far. Sophia smiled up at him, her heart finally full. I never thought I'd be here with you as your daughter. I never thought I'd be loved. You are loved, Michael replied, his voice thick with emotion. And you always will be. The wind rustled the trees, and for a long moment they stood together in the silence, knowing that whatever the future held, they had each other. The past was no longer a burden, and the future, though unknown, was now full of promise. And as they walked back into the house, hand in hand, Michael realized that he had found what he had been missing all along. Family, love, and a purpose greater than any business deal or success. The journey wasn't over, but it had finally begun. If you've been moved by Michael and Sophia's journey, don't forget to subscribe, and turn on the notification bell to stay updated on their emotional story. Comment below to let us know where you're watching from and what you think about their journey together. Your support helps us grow this community and continue to share heartfelt stories.